Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Derek again over at Turning Technologies Canada. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to get started here because we do have a lot of content to pack into the next 60 minutes, and we want to make sure that Drew gets through everything. Today we will be using GoToWebinar. Most of you are probably familiar with it. You'll have a panel probably off to the right side of your screen. You might have it at the top or the left depending on your system setup. There's a chat tool there. There's also a questions tool, so please feel free to ask questions as we go. Because of the amount of content we have to cover today, we will likely save questions until the end of the session. Anything we can't get to live, we will answer those in email format and send those out as a PDF attachment with the presentation recording. So with that said, I have Drew Douglas here with me today. He's going to be our guest presenter. Drew is a First Nations person that started with his home community, Rama First Nation, as a health and safety trainee in January 2011. Almost immediately, Drew knew he had found his niche in life and aspired to be an influential safety professional. Straight away, he began taking courses towards his OHS certificate from Ryerson University, which he completed. He's now pursuing the Advanced Safety Management Certificate, also offered by Ryerson, an eventual CRSP and CHSC designation. In May 2015, Drew formally took the reins for managing the entire safety program at Rama. Drew is very active with the Canadian Society of Safety Engineering and is chair of the Barrie chapter. He's also a volunteer with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. At present, you will find Drew buried in paper while implementing the Z1000 CSA standard and championing a lasting climate and culture of safety for the First Nation. When he's not at work, his wife, newborn daughter, and 2 sons aged 6 and 7 keep him busy, and he secretly admits to often longing for Monday morning when Friday evening rolls around. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Drew Douglas here to the webinar today, and I will let him take it away. So over to you, Drew.
Okay, thank you, Derek. So today we're going to be talking about making safety training fun, but effective as well. And to that end, there's 3 objectives that I want to kind of take you through. I'd like to talk about engagement. I want to talk about my favorite tool for AV, and that's Prezi. And I also, a very important part of training that I know not many trainers do, and that's evaluating your training. So those are kind of the 3 topics or 3 objectives that I want to kind of hash out for you in the next 60 minutes or so. Before we get to those though, using the polling questions, I'd like to just assign teams, and you'll see why later on in the training. So which quarter were you born? If you are viewing the responseware, you'll see that A, B, C, D are Raptors, Maple Leafs, Blue Jays, and Argonauts. We're going to put them with quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. So if you were born in January, February, March, you're on the Raptors team. If you were born in April, May, June, you're on the Maple Leafs. July, August, September, the Blue Jays. On October, November, December, you're on the Argonauts team.
Just a quick reminder, everybody, if you would like to participate in the questions in your web browser, just go to rwpoll.com and enter the session ID safety, and you'll be able to answer these questions. If you do not see the question currently on your browser and it says waiting for presenter, please just hit the refresh button on your browser window and you'll see the question and answer choices pop up right away. Thanks.
So I figured Turning Technologies being here in beautiful Barrie, Ontario, closest to Toronto, that's why I picked these 4 sports teams. Very important to give your teams names. Much cooler to have an actual team name than to be Team A or Team 3. So we have 20 people that have logged in and responded, so we're going to close the polls there. and we are pretty evenly split except for the Maple Leafs. So moving on, I thought I'd give you the power and ask you which objective you'd like to learn about first. So if you'd like to learn about Prezi first, push A, click A, engagement through turning point, push B, and training evaluation, push C. You'll see that the way I conduct this training is the way I do it in real life. I use both Prezi and PowerPoint, and I flop back and forth between them in order to do the response questions. Okay, I'm going to close the polls there. And overwhelmingly, Prezi is the first thing everyone wants to learn about. So let's talk about Prezi. One more poll. I'd like to ask you how much you know about Prezi. Do you know and use Prezi currently? Would you strongly agree with that sentiment or strongly disagree? So 46% of you know very little or know nothing at all about Prezi. So hopefully I can explain it to you. I'm going to kind of go through the basics of it, the bare bones of it, and explain Prezi to you. So Prezi is an amazing tool. If you think about the traditional way that we use AV when we do training, we kind of use this old format, and I'm sure you've seen this 1,000 times before, particularly if you attend a lot of conferences or you attend a lot of training sessions. This is kind of the typical PowerPoint slide setup we see. There's a title to the slide, there's a bunch of bullet points, and the presenter is up there, hopefully not just reading the bullet points, but that could be a possibility, more likely elaborating on the bullet points. They finish the first slide, they move to the next slide, and again, same thing. And by this slide, many of you have stopped reading the bullet points. By the third slide, you're starting to think, wow, this training's horrible. And there's many reasons for that. One of the big reasons is the way we actually take in contextual information. Marketers have done like retina scans and made these heat maps, and they've noticed that because we read top to bottom, left to right, we make these F-shaped patterns when we look at textual information. So the majority of our concentration is in the top left corner of the screen. And as we read on, less and less of our concentration, less and less of our attention is devoted to that text, that information. So if you put anything in the kind of the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, it just gets lost on your trainees. And one of the things about PowerPoint is that it's kind of an old adage based on a very old model, that old slide projector that has been in use for training sessions since the 50s. And many presenters still use that, and one of the big problems with it is that linear format that it takes you through. You have to go through linear slide, 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 and usually you devote a lot of time to text on those slides. I'll just show you another example. Let's say I wanted to explain to you the difference between the left and the right brain, and I wanted to describe what the left brain was responsible for and what the right brain was responsible for. Even if I was a very dynamic presenter and I threw these two bullet point lists up and I stood up explaining them, and maybe I even did some animation with PowerPoint, I animated the lists in, maybe I even got fancy and put a cool background behind it, you're still not going to get very much information out of a slide like this. I think you'll find that it's much more effective as a trainee to see something more like this, right? To see the left brain versus the right brain and to see a grand visual picture to kind of describe that to you. And with Prezi, you can zoom in and explain further. Okay, the left brain is the logical side. It's the analytical. It's the order. And as you're speaking about that, you can see the big graphic behind that helps you with that visual metaphor that kind of connects the message of the presentation to the metaphor that the picture should display. And then we can zoom into the right brain and talk about that's the creative side, that's the emotional side. And you know, I've been told and I've heard that our brain functions best when both the left and the right brain are engaged. So really what that means as a trainer is that you want to put a lot of pictures and a lot of content like this along with a lot of content like this. You need to have both, and you need to really show both sides of the brain in order to attract or engage your trainees to their fullest potential. One of the key things I hate about PowerPoint is illustrated best by this video. So I think that clearly illustrates some of the problems with PowerPoint. If you have a pencil and paper with you, I'd like you to just pull out a blank piece of paper and quickly jot down 9 dots in this shape right now. I want to illustrate another point that makes Prezi so effective. What I'd like you to do, if you've done so already, I'd like you to join all 9 dots using only 4 lines, and of course you can add that caveat that your pen cannot leave the paper. So I'll give you 10-15 seconds now to do that, to attempt to do that, I should say. If any of you have done it or have seen it, then you know what I'm about to show. So let's see the correct answer here. First one I think makes a lot of sense, stay inside the box. The next line, you actually go outside the box. And that's how you accomplish joining all 9 dots with only 4 lines. It takes a paradigm shift, it takes thinking outside the box. And that's what a tool like Prezi allows you to do. It allows you to leave format behind, which is what a lot of us are so worried about, or used to be so worried about with our PowerPoint slides. You know, you want to make sure your bullet points are perfectly aligned and slide 1 looks exactly like slide 27 and the font is perfect and the size of the font is perfect. With Prezi, you can leave all that behind because you're not going through your slides or through your frames in that linear progression like you do with PowerPoint. So it allows you to think outside the box. And once you're thinking outside the box and you've shifted that paradigm, now you can start focusing on what your training should be about, what your message really needs to be, which is the story, the presentation, which is really what people are engaging with. They're not so much engaging with your tool, your AV material, they're engaging with you as the trainer. And you need to be focused on that story. When I do orientation and I talk about the internal responsibility system and I talk about one of the responsibilities of the employer being to provide information, instruction, and training, you can put that bullet point up there all you want, information, instruction, and training. But it's much more effective to your learners, to your trainees, if you actually highlight, for example, a Ministry of Labor news bulletin that explains why one municipality or one corporation was actually charged with not providing information, instruction, and training, and go through that story with your participants, with your learners. And I have several, but for time's sake, I won't go into any of them. So to reiterate, what Prezi does is Prezi gives you an infinite canvas versus a linear set of slides. And on that infinite canvas, you can place anything you want, anywhere you want. So, for example, you can organize all of your thoughts. So today we're talking about making training fun, and you can browse through them after you've organized them all. So this was a simple mind map I made to create today's training. So with Prezi, you can put that mind map basically on your Prezi and then figure out how you want to browse through it. So for example, today I wanted to talk about Prezi, I wanted to talk about some of the differences to PowerPoint, explain a little more of the basics, talk about zooming, talk about the canvas and the big picture, which is what we're doing right now, right? So as I've already said, it allows you to zoom. You can zoom all around the canvas, and you can zoom into the smaller details and show smaller subtopics or smaller ideas. On the other hand, the other really cool thing about Prezi is that it allows you to zoom out. And this is really what captivates your audience, because you can zoom out and show the whole big picture and really display a strong visual metaphor for what you're trying to achieve or what you're trying to say. And this really works well if the message you're trying to convey in your training, you've done your needs analysis and you know the main messages you want to give. If you can find a visual metaphor that represents that message and you put that behind your training and you kind of show that at the end as the big reveal, or you can show it at the beginning saying this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how Prezi shows you the big picture, and then zoom into your finer details and then come back out to the big picture at the end. So let's go back to our polling software and just do a couple simple column response questions just to see how much of that information I gave to you has been retained. I'll ask you, we tend to look in textual content in a what-shaped pattern. And I should state here that I tend to never read the answers when I'm doing turning point questions. And the reason I do that is somebody said to me once, you know, you change the inflection of your voice when you read the answer, when you read the right answer, eh? And as you can guess, I'm a horrible poker player. And ever since that person pointed that out to me, I have resolved to never ever read the answers when I'm doing a multiple choice question like this using turning point. Let's see how we did. So 68% of us did get it right. We do read in an F-shaped pattern when we look at textual content. The other, those of you that answered A and E, I suspect those are the ones that have this webinar shrunk down in a small box in the corner of their screen and they're doing the rest of their regular work. We'll see if we can't hook you to make it full screen. A couple more questions. Prezi has an infinite canvas. And I've given you some options with this true-false question. I've given you the option to tell me if you're guessing or if you actually have confidence in your answer. And I love doing this when I show true-false questions because as a presenter, as a trainer, it really lets me know if they've actually retained the information or if they're going with the 50-50 gut instinct and going with that shot at whether they're going to get the question correct or not. So everyone said true. Correct. Awesome. Only a quarter of you that answered guessed. One more. Prezi allows you blank freedom of movement. Let's see how we answered there. 92% said complete, and the 92% are correct. You have complete control over the way you zoom around your canvas and the way you go into your different frames. So here's our team, how our teams fare so far. Argonauts and Raptors are tied for first place, and the Blue Jays are not far behind, so if you're on the Blue Jays team, there is still time to catch up. The Maple Leafs are not on the board, which means the few members that are on the Maple Leafs have not answered any of the questions correctly. So, what would you like to learn about now? Which objective would you like to talk about next? Okay, 67% say engagement. Wow, what a coincidence. This is the way I laid out this training. It would have worked if we'd have jumped around, but okay, we can go through it the way I've laid it out. So let me ask you one quick question before we talk about engaging training. Do you think your training programs currently are engaging to your participants? So 46% up in the agree, 8% strongly agree. A few of you are down in the disagree side, 12%. We'll see if we can't get you to boost those numbers by the end of this training, especially for the next training program that you develop. So, jump back to my Prezi here, and we'll talk about engagement. So the first thing I want to talk about utilizing Turning Point is thought-provoking polls and questions. And up until now, and actually, to tell you the truth, throughout this presentation, I've kind of do what most of you probably do currently, and that's ask you to repeat back to me the information I just dumped on you. So kind of that call and response question, I tell you a bit of information, then I ask you a question about the information I just gave you. And that can be effective to help employees or help trainees retain some of that information, because then they see it in black and white. They know if they actually are thinking correctly or if they have the message that you've delivered. But a much more effective tool or a much more effective question is one that actually makes your participants think. It allows them to engage with you and allows them to actually have an actual provoked thought from your question. And I'll tell you, the first time I saw Turning Point, actually, me and Derek were joking earlier that I've known him for 5 years. The first time I saw Turning Point was at a Partners in Prevention conference in 2011. And one of the keynotes there was a man by the name of Dr. Linkenbach. And he's part of this organization. I think he partly founded this Most of Us organization. He's based in Montana. And he does a lot of research into what the societal norm or what the societal perception is versus what the actual reality is. So for example, with this advertisement, he displays that, you know, many of us perceive that everyone's wearing seatbelts, but the reality is always that is actually in Montana only about 3 out of 4 people actually wear seatbelts. So he does that to kind of shatter perceptions and explain that the reality is much more truthful than the perception, and we tend to skew perceptions either below what reality is or above what reality is. And he did a really amazing set of questions, and I'd like to illustrate it right now. So these are 3 questions that I asked in some infectious disease training that I gave to my staff a couple of years ago. So proper hand hygiene is important to me. This is the basic Likert scale question, those of you that are familiar with Turning Point. Let's see how we respond to this. So of course, 81% up in the strongly agree, and I would hope that that's the case. I know and exercise proper hand washing techniques. Would you agree with that statement? So now we're down a little bit, but still 90% of us up in that AB range, up in that strongly agree range, 5% down in the disagree. That's interesting. One more question. I wash my hands for a minimum of 30 seconds every time I wash. How would you agree with that statement? This is really the statement where the rubber meets the road, as they say. Oh no, now we're all over the place. Only a quarter of us strongly agree to that statement. 28% disagree, even though 90% of us just said we knew and exercised proper hand washing techniques. 85% of us, almost 100% of us, said that hand hygiene was important to us. Why then are so few of us actually washing our hands for a minimum of 30 seconds every time we wash? A set of questions like that really can evoke a lot of emotion in your audience and can evoke a lot of, wow, that's very interesting. And it kind of shatters, like Dr. Linkenbach says, it shatters that perception of what we actually think of what's actually happening and what the reality actually is. Another one of my favorite turning point questions I wanted to share with you is, before I get to that, let's see who the dirtiest team is. So I guess it's tied between the Raptors and the Argonauts because 17% on each strongly disagreed. Blue Jays also fairly dirty. 50% of them disagreed with washing their hands for a minimum of 30 seconds. Oh, I'm just messing with you. Blue Jays, Raptors, Argonauts. So this is another one of my favorite questions to ask, and I actually use this exact question in my orientation after I've explained the IRS, the internal responsibility system. For those of you, the non-safety people on the call right now, the IRS is the concept that the workplace is divided into 3 groups. In each of the 3 groups, the employee, supervisor, employer all have their own unique role, their own set of responsibilities to fulfill to keep the workplace safe. I love asking this question, which party has failed? So we call this guy, let's call him Mac. We see Mac working unsafely. Let's say Mac were to fall and get hurt, and there was an investigation. Who would they determine to be at fault? Is it Mac's fault? Is it this Mac's supervisor? Is it the employer or the owner of this shop factory? Or all of the above? Or none of the above? You can't fault Mac for being creative. Yes, a lot of safety people in the room, I suspect. So 95% say all of the above because we're familiar with the fact that the IRS is a system. Once one piece of it breaks, the whole thing crumbles, the whole thing falls down. But what's really cool now is with your participants, you can actually go through and explain. You can ask them and you can have that back and forth and say, so why is it Mac's fault? Let's talk about Mac. Let's talk about the employee. Why is it his fault? And you'll probably get the inevitable response of, he should have known better, right? Then you can get into Mac's supervisor. Why is it his fault? Why is it Mac's supervisor's fault? Well, maybe he wasn't watching Mac. He wasn't actually supervising him at the time. Maybe he wasn't competent. All that kind of stuff. You can talk about the employer, and I love to say, maybe the employer's at their summer home or their winter home in Florida right now. So why are they even at fault? They're not even in the country. And then you can talk about, they didn't appoint a competent supervisor, or probably the more correct or the more apt, they didn't provide the proper safety device, the proper safety materials to allow Mac to do his job safely, which in this case would be, a scaffold or a lift of some kind. But I love questions like that where you can, all of the above questions where you can talk about all the right answers and explain each of them individually after everyone's answered the question. So I'll show you what Dr. Linkenbach did. He kind of did what I did with the hand washing, but he did it with teeth brushing. And he did his 3 questions were, do you think oral hygiene is important? And of course, inevitably, 95% said yes. And then he asked, do you think everyone here brushed their teeth this morning? Again, 95% said yes. And then the 3rd question, did you brush your teeth this morning? This is when the polls, the responses actually fell right off, and I was so surprised that only about 45% of the people in the room, and this was a fairly large keynote session, probably 500 plus safety people, had not brushed their teeth that morning. Now, granted, it was an early keynote. Maybe perhaps people had the intention of brushing their teeth afterward. I'm not sure. But when I saw those 3 questions and I participated in those polls, I knew right then and there that I really needed to have Turning Point. I thought it was just the most amazing tool that a trainer could use in order to evoke that emotion, in order to evoke those thought-provoking, those ideas and concepts. Another important thing that a trainer needs to think about when giving a training session is what we call soft breaks. We need to take time to re-engage or re-get our audience back on our page and get them to pay attention to what we're trying to say and the message we're trying to deliver. And there's a time frame when we need to do that. So I thought I'd throw it back to you with the Turning Point and ask you, without telling you, how often do you think soft breaks are required in a given presentation or in a given training session? Let's see how we fared. So most of you got it correct. The correct answer was actually 7 to 10 minutes. I did give some points to those of you that answered 7 minutes and those of you that answered 10 minutes. I know that Turning Point or Turning Technologies actually has publications that talk about breaks every 7 minutes, and my research has shown that every 10 minutes is kind of the other common thing, so I would suggest to you that at least every 7 to 10 minutes you do a soft break in your training session. And there's a few different ways to do that. My 2 favorite ways are either going to a video or, of course, using Turning Point and actually polling your audience. And you need to mix up your polling. Don't just have those call and response questions that actually have right and wrong answers, but actually throw out those Likert scale questions, throw out those actual opinion poll questions, no right or wrong answers. Because those are also what really engages your audience. Oh, we seem to be having technical difficulty on the audio. I assure you, when you see the Prezi, it'll be on the Prezi. We'll ship it out to you afterwards as well. But I wanted to show this video as a nice little segue into team competition, which is my personal favorite, and I can tell you has totally changed the climate of training at Rama when it comes to engaging your participants or engaging your audience. Now, you can set your room up in a number of different ways. I tend to go with one of these 3 room setups, the classroom style, the U-shaped conference, or table groups. And to tell you the truth, I mostly do table groups. But as you can see, very easy to arrange your teams based on any of these room setups. With the classroom, you can do rows or columns or pairs. U-shaped conference, you have 3 teams. Table groups, of course, each of the tables is their own team. And I used to be very worried about table groups and table teams because I used to be worried about table talk. You know, people sharing the right answer, and it's supposed to be an individual quiz as well and a way for you to assess their learning. So if one person at the table is sharing the right answer with the other 5 and they all get the right answer even though they may not have paid attention or they may not have known, I used to be so worried about that. And in fact, the first time I used Turning Point, I said to everyone, okay, I know this is a team competition, but these are still individual quizzes, and I'd like every one of you to kind of keep the voices down and no talking during the questions, and it just wasn't as fun as it could have been. Since then, though, I've learned that I know Turning Technologies calls Table Talk something. They call it pure instruction. And I've found that pure instruction can actually aid you as a trainer. And one of the things that I say to table groups when I'm doing a team competition style training, I'll say, don't just go with the alpha at the table that says, C, 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 everyone picks C, because all of you pick C, and then it may turn out that that's the wrong answer, and then your whole team has gone down in points. Much more effective is if you have the person that knows the right answer explain the right answer to the table, or if you're a member of the table group that's listening and participating, ask the person, well, what's your reasoning? What's your argument why that's the answer we should pick? Because then you'll actually have good, strong, pure instruction happening at each of those tables. And that old adage, we learn 90% of what we teach. So if you have your participants in your training actually reteaching the training to their peers, you actually have that much more retention in the knowledge of the concepts that you're giving out. Now, with team competition, you got to have prizes, right? Any competition's got to have a prize. I went to a training conference last year, and the presenter did something awesome which I hadn't seen before. She was using Turning Point, and she was using fastest responders. If you're not familiar with that, that's the first correct answer. So the least amount of time to answer correctly, it will display on the screen. I'll show you some examples in a second. But she actually said, okay, so the next question's for all the marbles. And actually, funnily enough, I was right on the ball. I was ready to answer. I knew it was going to be a true-false question by the way it was phrased, and I knew it was going to be true, so I was pushing A before she even displayed the answers. And I actually won the fastest responder. And then she pulled out an actual bag of marbles that I'm sure she got at the dollar store or something and gave them to me, and everybody in the audience laughed. I still have the marbles on my desk, and I've yet to use them in training, but I thought, wow, that was so effective. All the marbles. Makes so much sense. I went to another training, and the instructor said, okay, the team that wins this, I'm going to give each member of that team a new car. And of course the prize was actually a Matchbox car still in the box. So of course it's shiny, it's brand new. The one that I've actually used, or the two that I've actually used, are the next two. The first one was Dinner for Four. 2 years ago, the first time I used Turning Point at Rama, we did a big Jeopardy game as the learning assessment after the training was over. And before the Jeopardy game, I said to all the table groups, all the teams, and I do have an amazing grand prize for all of you. I actually have dinner for four for each of the winning team members, and everybody got so excited. They were hooping and hollering. People were really down when they got the wrong answers, and people were so bright and bushy-eyed and paying attention to the questions. And then I revealed at the end that it was just boxes of Kraft Dinner for each of them. And if you read the box of Kraft Dinner, it actually says 4 servings right on the box, and that's how I got around being dinner for 4. This past year, I went the more prestige route, and I said to the team, we do have a grand prize again this year, and I won't reveal what it is, but I will tell you that this year's grand prize, the value of it surpasses last year's grand prize. And then everyone remembered the Kraft Dinner, which I think I got on sale for less than $1 a box. And this year I gave out just little plastic trophies that, again, I got at the dollar store. And I go around my workplace now, and I still see them displayed on some people's desks or in some people's offices. This kind of a testament to the fact that their team won the big competition at the mandatory training. So those are some of the prizes that I've seen and that I've used, and I think that they are really effective. If you say there's going to be a prize, you'd be surprised how many people perk up and pay attention to the message you're trying to deliver. So we mentioned Jeopardy. And I'd like to show you the Jeopardy, a shortened version of the Jeopardy that I actually gave 2 years ago to Rama First Nation. So let me just move back to the PowerPoint here. So normally what I'd do is I'd ask the highest ranking person in the room the director or the VP to pick the first category and pick the first point value. And once that director picked the point value, we'd go from there. So in this case, I'm just going to pick at random. Maybe I'll pick hazards for 300. For 300 points, and of course you got to put on your best Alex Trebek voice if you do a Jeopardy game, right? Ways equipment can contribute to hazards. What is being the improper equipment, not being maintained properly, being inherently hazardous, or all of the above? You'd be surprised how many people called me Alex during this training when they were asking for a specific Just a minute, we're having some technical difficulties with the poll. One second. Sorry about that. Something happened with Turning Point. Hate when things glitch out on a webinar, but oh well, we're going to keep on keeping on. The answer here was all of the above. And I built the fastest responder into my Jeopardy game so that we could see the fastest participant. Oh, it actually did work. The fastest participant would then select the next category. And if you were actually using Turning Point and you registered all your users, then the responders would not come up with these ID codes or these device IDs. It would actually come up with the actual names. And this is really cool because it reinforces to those that get it right, they know that they got it right because they were in the top 3, they were the top 3 fastest responders. Right? And then I'd allow the fastest responder to pick the next category. Maybe we'll do a couple more here. We'll do grab bag for 100 points. According to the Centers for Disease Control, everyone should do this. Let's see how you answer on this one. You should answer fairly correctly. Okay, let's see how we fared. Hey, 83% said 30 seconds, 83% are correct. 30 seconds. And the fastest responder in this case was 2FFF6B81. Actually, if you click on the information tab of your responseware, you'll see your user device ID. It'll actually tell you your device ID. But I'm going to move on. We'll do one more category here, one that I clicked earlier because it's disappeared, but I'm going to do grab bag for 300 just to show you one more thing you got to have if you're going to play Jeopardy with your trainees, and that's a daily double, right? So let's see how our teams are standing right now. The Blue Jays are on top now, 318 points, Raptors 295, and the Argonauts are down at 250. So that'll give you an idea of how much you may want to wager on this next question, which remember was a grab bag question. So which percentage of your current points would you like to wager on this question? So what these wager slides do, if you've ever used team competition and Turning Point, they actually take the mean average of what your whole team decides. So if you have a team of 4, 2 decide 0, and 2 decide 100%, it will actually go with 50% as the wager. Okay. So latency is most commonly related to this or these. What are safety hazards, health hazards, or all of the above? See how many participants in the room have done the, from the Ontario anyway, have done the mandatory awareness training. This is one of the key elements in that. So 53% said all of the above. 53% are wrong. The answer is actually health hazards. And you got to do some Trebeki type moments like that when you do Jeopardy, right? So health hazards are the ones that you expose yourself, especially if you chronically or repetitively expose yourself to them. 20, 30 years from now, you'll have a latent effect, and that's when you'll start to feel the effects, right? And again, we do the fast responders. And I could go through and show you all 9 of these questions, but for time's sake, I think we'll move on. See how our teams are doing right now. So just the Blue Jays and the Argos are still on the board, which means that the Raptors lost all their points in that last wager question. So right now, Blue Jays on top, 264. So on to our last part of the training, which is talking about evaluation. I'm not going to poll you on it because I know we only have one concept left, so I built a hyperlink in to move to that section. And let me ask you this. Do you currently evaluate the effectiveness of your training? These Likert style questions at the beginning of a training module really give you an idea as a trainer how in depth you need to go in that module. If you, for example, built in some conditional branching or you're using a Prezi, you could skip over the simple stuff and jump right into the more detailed stuff if you had people that more strongly agreed. So about a third of us are neutral, a few of us down on the strongly disagree. Hopefully I'm going to make you understand why it's so important to evaluate the effectiveness of your training right now. So a guy named Don Kirkpatrick, back in the late 50s, wrote a series of papers. And in that series of papers, he talked about training, and he talked about the way to evaluate training. And he said that there really are 4 levels with respect to the way we can evaluate our training. The first tier is their reaction. So did they like the training? The next tier is, did they actually learn something? You get over and above that, how are they behaving now? What are they performing like? And the very top tier is, did you actually achieve the results you wanted to achieve? Right? So you've done your needs assessment, you're developing your training, you know why you need to do the training because of your needs assessment. Now, are you actually achieving those results? And now that gap has now disappeared because of those results you've achieved. Right? And I see that the chair of the Z1001 CSA Standard on Occupational Health and Safety Training is on the call. He'll say that actually, I think it's the latter part of Section 6. So I'm going to say it's Section 6.6. I'm not for sure on that, but in the Z1001 standard actually speaks to all these 4 levels of evaluation. So reaction, that's the easy stuff. You ask them if they like it, right? You can ask them about the delivery, the pace, the content, the temperature in the room, your style of delivery, the workshops you did, all the things you did. You can ask them how they felt about the training. And you can kind of gives you a basic toll as a trainer as to how well your training actually was. The next level, you actually get into now assessing their learning. And we can do that very easily, obviously, with Turning Point and building in these multiple choice type questions. Some of the higher end response cards, you can actually have, short answer and even full essay style answer to some of the questions as well. Observation of performance, are they actually now performing the way you want them to perform? So you've set an expectation, you've said that, oh, we need to actually train our people on this expectation so they understand it. You do the training, are they now meeting that expectation that you've set? And now for most of us, for most organizations, this is put on the supervisor, right? The supervisor can watch their employees and make sure that they are now meeting that expectation that has been set by the corporation or by the organization and they've all been trained on. And of course, the backup is always the committee. The committee can come through and say that after such and such an incident investigation, this employee did not meet the expectation that they took the training in, or whatever, so on and so forth. And of course, the highest level of evaluation is actually the results in your organization. So why are you doing this training at all? Well, you probably want to lower your risks, right? You want to reduce the likelihood of some of these hazards actually happening and you actually having incidents because of some of these hazards, right? Your training, we all know, well, the safety professionals on the call know that it's an administrative control. So did you actually increase your controls? Did you consider that training program or that delivery of that training an actual increase in the control for that hazard that needs assessment of why you actually needed to do the training in the first place? And then, of course, as always, the safety people look to those lagging indicators, and have you actually had a reduction in your incidents and injuries because of this training? So maybe your needs analysis, your organization has a lot of motor vehicle incidents, a lot of driving problems. So you put everyone through a proactive defensive driving training program. Now, are you actually having less of those MVIs in your organization, right? I think it's very cool that with this tool, with Turning Point, the first two levels of this are very easy to achieve. Very easy to capture the reactions of your participants and assess their learning using Turning Point, right? The next two levels, that takes a little more work, probably by you, by the safety professional in the organization, or by the HR person, to actually observe the performance and determine if their training has actually allowed them to meet the expectation that's been set, or the results in the organization are actually being achieved, the results that they want to achieve. So it's very important to consider evaluation, or how you're going to evaluate while you're developing your training program, because if you're, for instance, going to measure their learning, and for example, you're going to use Turning Point, you need to know how you're going to build that learning assessment into your training. What kinds of questions are you going to ask? How are you going to phrase them? How are you going to mix them up? Is there going to be anonymity, or is there going to be registered people to the response cards, so that you can actually gauge each person's specific responses in that training? So let's ask a few column response questions with training evaluation, shall we? What is the easiest but least effective method of evaluating training? So this is where I can gauge if you've actually retained the knowledge I just gave to you. It's really slow and lagging here. Apologize for that. So, most of you got it. It was actually the reaction survey. That's right. Next question. I can use Turning Point to evaluate my training via oh no, this broadband world we live in is failing us. Here we go. Poll's open. Oh, see, now here's a question. Less than half of us actually got the right answer to this. So as a trainer, this is something where I would actually probably go back and re-go through the 4 levels of evaluation and re-explain how you can use Turning Point to evaluate your training, and talk about really only the assessment or the measurement of the learning and the reaction survey can be evaluated using Turning Point, right? C and D. And one more question. Is it important to consider evaluating my training during the program design phase? Quick true or false question. And everyone got it. Of course it is true. So there you have it. The Blue Jays ended up on top with 420 points, and if I had a prize, I'd send a prize to each and every person on the call that registered as a Blue Jay. And the Raptors brought up the rear, but the Maple Leafs didn't even make the board, the few percent of you that decided to be on the Maple Leafs. And I think that's pretty comical for those of you that are Toronto fans. So we come to the end now of our training, and I think that I have explained how through Turning Point and through different ways of engaging your audience, you can make your training fun and effective. Using Prezi is another great tool that allows you to make your training fun and effective. And of course, that effective piece, so important to evaluate your training to determine if it actually was effective. Because it's all well and good to have a great, fun training session, but a day from now, a week from now, if it doesn't mean anything to the organization, what was the point of actually doing that fun training, right? And I think the important thing for all of you to know or all of you to remember is that Prezi is a great tool, Turning Point's a great tool, but really at the end of the day, the message, the training itself is the most important thing that you're trying to achieve, right? So the evaluation is really the key thing here. We want to make sure that our training is delivering the message we want it to deliver, and we're actually having all our participants or our employees in our organization achieve those objectives or achieve that expectation that we've set. So we've created a policy, we've communicated on it, and now we're providing the training on it so everyone knows and uses and understands that policy, right? So just for my sake, I'd like to do a quick reaction survey with all of you. And I'll tell you that normally when I do a feedback reaction survey, I wouldn't show the results to the participants. I'd wait and look at them afterwards and pore over them and look at all my reports using Turning Point. But for the sake of this training, I think I'm pretty confident that, or I'm pretty hopeful that you'll answer the way you want to answer it. But again, there's full anonymity. Give me that constructive criticism. Don't tell me what I want to hear. So how was the pacing for the presentation of materials today? I won't dwell on the responses, but I'll show them quickly. 2/3 said just right. How much did you know about all of this stuff before today? So how much did you understand Prezi or Turning Point or properly evaluating your training before this webinar? So 50% somewhat understood, 39 little understanding. And now, how do you feel about your knowledge of those three topics that we covered? How much do you think you understand about Prezi or engagement through Turning Point and video or evaluation? Now we've moved up to 89% somewhat understood. That's, as a trainer, that's what I love to see. I love to see when we move from the bottom side of the Likert scale to the top side of the Likert scale for those two questions. One more question though. How confident are you in your ability to use this information the next time you develop some training? Because it's all well and good to have the knowledge, but if you're not actually confident in your use of that knowledge, it really speaks to the training itself, and perhaps I should have done more. So we're down a little bit, 75% still was somewhat confident. One more reaction question. You always got to end with this one. Overall, how would you rate this training? You don't always have to go with the Likert scale that Turning Point uses. I like to mix it up and make it more fun sometimes. Awesome. 38% of you said awesome. I feel like I've done my job as a trainer in explaining these 3 objectives to you. And with that, we'll show the team MVPs again. If you click on the information tab on your ResponseWare, you can see your device ID. These are 3 participants carried their teams. This one participant on the Argonauts got 1,000 points. That's pretty impressive. They pretty well got every question right. And with that, I'd like to say miigwech, which is Ojibwe for thank you, and we'll turn it back over to Derek if there's any questions that came through on the chat.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Drew. That was a great presentation. Thank you, everybody, for attending and coming out. Again, the recording will be made available of this training session along with the Prezi and any PDFs that need to go along with it. If you do have any questions, please feel free to submit them now, and Drew and I will stick around for a few minutes just to go through those. Again, thank you very much, Drew. I think everybody kind of got a feel for how busy you are from the bio that I read at the beginning. So we definitely appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come down to the office and help out with the webinar here. So again, thank you very much, and please feel free to submit any questions, and Drew and I will stick around now for a couple minutes to answer them. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Great question from Julie. She asked, how easy or difficult is it to switch between Prezi and Turning Point? And it's very, very easy if you're at the computer. All you do is that simple. Unfortunately, I don't use a Mac. I don't know what it is in Mac, but in Windows, that simple Alt-Tab function that allows you to switch between your Prezi and any other programs you have open. So I try and set it up so that my Prezi and my PowerPoint are right beside each other, so that I can easily switch back and forth. So right now I'm back in the Prezi. So you can see I can zoom around, and then I can Alt-Tab over to the PowerPoint show, and this is back to the PowerPoint show, as you can see. So if you're not sitting at your computer and you use a presenter, it's a little more difficult. You basically have to trudge back up to your computer and switch between your PowerPoint and Prezi. Which brings up another point. Generally, when I do this style of training, I do a whole module, and then I do some questions on that module. I don't usually, as we did with this training, I don't usually throw questions in the middle of a module. For those soft breaks in the middle of a module, I'll use video, and I'll wait till the end of a module, and that way I just have to make my way back up to the computer to switch from the Prezi to the PowerPoint every 20 minutes or so between my modules.
That's great, Drew. One other thing I'd throw in really quick too, Julie, just to kind of mention is, you know, what Drew did today, like switching between Prezi and PowerPoint works. It's awesome, works really well. We do also, built into Turning Point, there is also an anywhere polling option that does allow you to poll questions over top of Prezi. The challenge is for some of the competition stuff that Drew wanted to do today, the anywhere polling doesn't have all the same competition features that the PowerPoint polling side has, so that's why we kind of, you know, alt-tabbed between the 2 applications. But you know, if you're just polling regular questions and things like that, the anywhere polling is a great option for doing that as well. Okay, so we'll stick around for another couple minutes for any other questions that that might come in. It looks like the lobby room is slowly emptying out here, so we'll take a couple more questions if anybody has it, and probably about 5 after 3 here Eastern, we'll shut the webinar down. Thanks. Okay, perfect. It doesn't look like there's any other questions at this point, so we'll close the webinar down for the afternoon. If anybody has questions that come to mind after we've wrapped up here today, please feel free to submit them directly to myself, training@turningtechnologies.ca, or Drew's got his contact information there on screen as well. You can email drewd@ramafirstnation.ca, and I'm sure he's more than happy to reach out and answer any questions that you might have directly. So again, thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time out of your day to join us, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon on another webinar.